Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today to talk through the new dispatcher and signal employee certification rules that FRA has published. A little bit about Spark TS. We have RailTasker and PeopleTasker, which is a DOT and FRA compliance tool. We happen to be a third-party administrator doing the drug and alcohol testing and record keeping along with that. And of course, a lot of you know us from the 243 side of our training and helping with 243 plans. Real quick introductions today. Paul will be leading us and walking us through the new final rules. He is our VP of operations here at Spark TS. Very excited to have him part of the team. Comes with a lot of FRA regulatory expertise as well as training and certification background in the industry. And then I am Katie Inoue, if we haven't met before, the CEO and founder of Spark TS. Today, we're going to be talking about these new final rules that were published, both parts 245 and 246 as a high-level overview. And then we've gotten a handful of questions of what does this mean for me? Looking at those of you who have joined, a lot of you are using RailTaskers. I'm just going to talk a couple minutes of what that means for you if you're one of our clients and using RailTasker. Really, there's not much you have to do. You'll have to be compliant, but you have all the tools already in your toolbox to manage these certifications. But I'll just walk through that. We do want your questions and answers. Before I give it over to Paul, I just want to say I've definitely been in contact with FRA about the final rules. Many of you on the call may have been, a couple of you also may have been in contact with FRA. They oftentimes join us for webinars, and I expect that will be the case. I know there's a compliance guide pending. However, certainly with any new final rule, questions could come up today that we might not be able to answer. And even FRA we might take FRA off guard too with a new final rule. Today, we'll do our best to answer what we can. And then I know when FRA joins us, they prefer a pre-list of questions. These rules are coming out next year, depending on if you're a class 1, class 2, or class 3, but as early as March 17th, right? We'll do some follow-up webinars and we can do some deep dives, hopefully with FRA joining us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to talk through first the certifications of dispatchers and then next signal employees.
Thanks, Katie said. I'm Paul Rogalski. I'm the VP of Operations with Spark. Background in 243 and instructional design and a RailTasker use. We'll be going through the quick overview or high overview of these new regulations. Again, have any questions, we'll try our best to answer them. And if not, we'll get the answers, hopefully, from the FRA. We'll start with part 245. The effective date is July 22nd. Submission deadlines being for class 1s, as it says there, National Railroad Passenger Corporation and commuter railroads is March 17th. You have to have them submitted by then. Class 2s and 3s and other railroads, submission date is November 12th of 2025. That's for existing people that already have existing dispatcher operations. A railroad that's starting new dispatcher operations after July 22nd, you have to have your program submitted and approved by the FRA before you begin dispatching operations. Those dates, I would say those dates are similar to if any of you dealt with the 243 regulation. You can continue your dispatching operations after you submit until the FRA gives you approval, so you don't have to wait for their approval to continue your operations.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
All right, but just pulled one key definition out of the dispatcher qualification. 245.7 has all the definitions in it, but just to make sure everybody's on board with what the FRA means by dispatching for this regulation, like I say, it basically deals with hours of service laws. If you perform dispatching service, and if you're a dispatching service employee, defined by the hours of service law. And then the next, bottom of this slide and the next slide, I won't read through the whole thing because it's a real wordy, is from these regulations, but it basically defines what dispatching means: controlling occupancy, moving trains, issuing directives. So any of that is considered dispatch operations. Yeah. All right, part 245.101 lists out what has to be included in your certification program. So you have to have all these components in there. You have to prior safety conduct as a motor vehicle operator, safety conduct as an employee or certified dispatcher on the railroad, substance abuse disorders, potential substance abuse, visual and hearing acuity. You have to have training, specified training and knowledge testing, as well as you have to perform operational performance tests, monitor operational performance on the dispatchers. A lot of this is similar to if you deal with the 240 or 242 regulations, very similar requirements for those as far as visual and hearing acuity, driving motor vehicle records, things like that. Again, if you're familiar with those, the requirements are very similar to those requirements. And then the operational performance is your 217. If you do 217 operational testing, it's going to be required now for certification and recertification of dispatchers as well. As far as the FRA review and submitting your programs, the only way to submit them right now is to send an email with your program to that email address in there. And again, that's in the regulation as well. One thing you have to do with this that's in there is you have to submit your program as well as a separate letter specifically requesting approval of the program. So if you just send your program in, but you don't send that letter in, theoretically, they may not send you back an approval because they are asking for a specific request for approval of the program. You can also,
Sorry.
At the same time, just like with 243, you have to send a copy of your program and the request for approval to the president of each labor organization. And another requirement in here, and I want to get some clarification on this, it says you have to also send it to every dispatcher that's subject to this part. I'm not sure if they want you to do that through the union or if there's another way to do that, something that we might need some clarification on.
I read it as probably directly to them, similar to what they did with the 219 rule with a copy of the plan for all the new mechanical employees. That's how I'm anticipating.
That's how I read it as well, but just want to make sure.
We can
they have 60 days to send any comments to the FRA. And then, like it says there, they'll typically respond to submissions within 120 days.
It was interesting. I've heard on one of the rules, this has been the norm, right? Since the risk reduction rule, the changes of 219 and 243, where we're simultaneously providing copies to labor organization. I think that it was actually the critical incident stress plans was the first rule that we had to do that for in an industry. And I was talking to someone at FRA, and I don't know that they've really gotten any comments back specifically for part 243, but it's certainly now the norm.
For the implementation schedule, the next part, like I said at the beginning, if you've already got dispatching operations in your railroad, you can continue to with the dispatching operations while you're waiting for the FRA approval. And again, new railroads have to have the approval prior to starting their dispatcher operations. Nothing too different there. Designated employees or grandfathering employees, just like with 243, if anybody was a certified or qualified dispatcher prior to March 17th of 2025, and if you get qualified between your submission date and the FRA approval, you can designate those employees as certified dispatchers. They didn't split this out between the two submission dates. The only date they have in there is March 17th. As of now, it looks like you have to designate between or prior to March 17th or between March 17th and the FRA's approval of your railroads or your program.
Yeah. And I'll just add to here, Paul. I'm looking, we've got a couple of the class ones on the line, but a lot of you all are short lines. Mm-hmm. And that is an interesting, similar to 243, you had to designate them, but it was after the implementation, and now you're designating prior to the implementation and then a little bit of a leeway. I think this is a really good question, specifically for how this is going to impact our short lines. Yeah. Class ones, that seems clear.
Yep. A few other highlights from the rule. 245.107 has the specific information you have to have in the submission as far as contact information, specific questions you have to answer if you're training your own employees, not training your own employees, things like that. 203 talks about records for the dispatchers and candidates. You have to keep them for 6 years from the date of the certification, recertification, denial, or revocation decision. Again, just record retention requirements in there. 205 specifies you have to maintain a list of currently certified dispatchers for your railroad at all times. That can be electronic or paper, however you want to do it. And then same with the issuing the certificates. You actually have to issue either a paper or electronic certificate to each certified dispatcher, again, similar to your conductors and engineers, so that they can prove that they are certified. And then there is a requirement, 215, again, similar to 243, You have to do an annual review beginning in calendar year 2027. That's just for the class 1s, commuters, and class 2 railroads. And you have to have that completed no later than March 31st for the previous calendar year. Again, very similar to 243 annual review. You're looking at accidents, incidents, FRA reports to see if you need to update or change your training program for your, or certification program for your dispatchers.
To me, it would be the same thing, right? Same annual review,
Right.
just like you can fold in your 217 operations testing for the operational tests. I would assume this annual review could be combined with your 243 annual review.
Just, yeah, you just had to have it done a little bit earlier since
Correct.
243 isn't due until September, but yeah, you can do them all together at the same time.
Again, I think noted for a question with FRA, but that's how I would read it.
Mm-hmm. All right. One other important part in there is the denial or revocation of certification. You have to have a process in place for denying or revoking certifications. If you're going to deny a certification or recertification, it has to be in writing. You have to explain why you denied it. If the reason for the denial is questioned or the employee gives you feedback as to why they thought they shouldn't be denied certification, you have to explain why you didn't take that into account or why it didn't cover the reason for the denial. You have to have the date of the railroad's decision, because again, you have to keep those records for 6 years if you deny it. And you have to give that to the candidate no later than 10 days from your decision.
Okay.
That's for the denial. The next one talks about the revocation of certification. Again, you have to have specific criteria for revoking the certification. It gives you some of that information in that .303 section, things that could be considered reasons for revoking the certification. You can only consider violations of its rules or practices. There's a whole list of items in there in .303 E1 through 7, but they can only have occurred within 3 years prior to the determination. You can't go back 5, 10 years to look at revoking somebody's certification. And then .305 ties into this because it says how long you can revoke a certification based on different criteria, the number and types of violations that occurred that caused you to revoke that certification.
Before we move on to 246, we got one question and I'm gonna see if we can pull it out. So just do you know if, oh yeah, usually definitions are in paragraph 5. Paragraph 7, do they define mechanical in the 245, or I'm not seeing.
I didn't see it.
I don't see it, but
yeah, I don't remember seeing it either.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that's been defined in the regulation. We'll see if we can get some clarity on that for you and follow up individually. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, let's talk through a little bit part 246. There's things as you're talking, Paula, that come to mind that I want to point out, but I'm gonna hold them for some things that are happening in industry as well. But they're very similar, if I'm not mistaken. But mm-hmm. Let's take a look at 246.
Yeah, 246, like Katie said, is very similar. The requirements are very similar to 245. This is for your signal employees. Again, same effective date, same submission deadline dates, March 17th for the class 1s and commuters, and November 12th, 2025 for the class 2s, 3s, and shorelines. And again, the same requirements there. If you already have signal employees and already doing the work, you can continue that work while you're waiting for your approval. But new railroads that are gonna be doing signal work, you have to have your FRA approval before you can begin. And like it says there, that includes installing, implementing, or operating signal systems. Okay, couple of key definitions again. Pulled out signal employee. For this part, it's anybody who's engaged in installing, troubleshooting, testing, repairing, or maintaining railroad signal systems or the technology. And then it lays out there, the next one, the signal systems, what they consider a signal system for this regulation. Like it says there, software and equipment.
No, I was gonna say, just to call out signal employee, it's anyone, right? So they're throwing in contractors regardless of the employer. Yeah.
Right, correct.
And then go ahead, sorry, signal systems.
Oh, that's fine. No, I was gonna say, yeah, this just lists out what they specify as what's considered a signal system for this regulation. You can see there's warning systems, detection devices, power assisted switches, point indicators, things like that.
Looks like 234, right? So it looks got it all pretty inclusive.
Yeah, looks like they covered pretty much everything. Again, we come to the required components. For the signal employees, one thing that is different is that you can break them up into occupational categories or subcategories, because that will get into the actual certifications themselves. So you don't have to certify every signal employee for every system or every type of work that they do. You can break them up into different occupational categories and certify them in the different areas. If you do that, though, you have to have all this criteria for each occupational category or subcategory laid out in your submission. That was one little difference. Otherwise, this next part, the other required components, these are, again, very similar to the dispatcher, motor vehicle operators, if they have a prior safety conduct with another railroad, substance abuse disorders, hearing and vision, training. A couple different ones here. You have to have a procedure for qualifying people on signal systems and signal related technology. You have to lay that out. That kind of ties into the training as I read it, but you have to specify that how you're going to actually qualify them on the different technologies you have. Knowledge testing, again, the same. Monitor operational performance, that's operations testing. And then they also added this one at the end here, the mentoring uncertified signal employees. So they're allowed to work. It's similar to OJT. They're allowed to work out there, but under the direct supervision of a qualified employee. But you have to have a plan for that laid out in your submission of how the mentoring program is going to work, how they're going to work with qualified employees while they're learning on the job.
Before we move on, I think this is where a lot of the questions in industry are within these requirements, specifically qualifying people on technology. What is the expectations? Where are we drawing the lines? I had a few conversations at one of the class ones recently on this, and I think there is a bit of ambiguity, and we'll be looking to FRA for more guidance. In high-level conversations, I think I've heard similarities of like how we were classifying roadway maintenance machines for the qualification under Part 214. Like a common sense approach is likely going to be okay, but again, we need clarity. On the mentoring piece, certainly most of the class ones have apprenticeship programs, but a lot of our short lines, if they're doing in-house signal work, they might have one or two signal maintainers, or just highlighting questions and concerns. If this is your guys' first time looking at these summaries, the other concern is if you're responsible for contractors and you're responsible to manage all the records, and I'll talk more about that in a moment, how are you going to be able to mentor when you don't have the in-house expertise, right? And the question just came up, why isn't there any mentoring in the dispatching final rule? Well, that's a good thing, but let's not ask them why it's not in dispatching. Let's ask them why it's in signal. Because I feel like it's burdensome for the short lines, and I'm sure the class ones aren't super excited about it either. I agree with your question, but I would flip it. Be like, I wouldn't say why it's missing. It's like, why was it added here? Just some high level stuff. And then, certainly the concerns around being responsible for contractors. And I'll talk through that more on the record keeping piece when I know I keep interjecting, but these things, when a lot of us have in the room on the call have experience with the implementation and new final rules, and it seems so simple when you see it in 7 bullets, and then you start thinking of the implications to your railroad operations, and it gets much more complex. Again, if you guys are thinking of questions, I'm just saying out loud the questions I have for FRA that we'll invite them back for, but if you have other questions, please share them with us and we'll get them ahead of time. But I think those are the 3 big things, especially at the signal. The dispatching one, I think, is maybe creating less concerns. I don't know, Paul.
Yeah, dispatcher seems a little more straightforward, and just due to the type of work for the signal employees, it's a little more complicated.
The dispatching contractor thing is interesting too, right? Because a lot of folks are outsourcing dispatching. We actually, here at Spark, we have a dispatching company that's trained dispatchers outsourcing our on-site collections. But if you're outsourcing your dispatchers, again, you're responsible for the record keeping. What does that actually mean, and how do you manage that? And then touche on the question. I got another question in. So what's the difference on mentoring versus training? Yeah, I think there's obviously, if we go to paragraph 124, it's going to give us some clarity. Usually training now in the world of 243 is going to be training and qualification together, where mentoring is more coming right from the union on building less formal as far as the specific qualification. But good question, and I think another one to really dive into. This is pretty similar. Yeah,
yeah, pretty similar, just a different email address. Yeah.
The designation is also the same thing with the March 17th, regardless of the railroad size. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. One thing I'll say about in the world of 243, if you want to get previous training records from another railroad or employer contractor, chances are slim to none you're going to get those. The certification rules will create that flow of record keeping between railroads. So that could be helpful in the hiring.
I'd say one thing with these, it's on the employee in these for getting their records from a previous railroad. They have to submit a request to the previous railroad they worked with. And according to the rules, the railroad, their previous railroad, has 30 days to get the new railroad those records. They actually put a time limit on it for these, and they put the burden on the employee to get the records as well.
Interesting. Anything you want to call out that's unique here with the record keeping?
No, the record keeping is the same. You have to keep the 6 years of records from certification, recertification, denial of revocation. Everything else is the same. You have to keep current records, and you have to do an annual review as well with the same dates starting in 2027.
Is the process similar on the denial of revocation?
Almost exactly the same, yep.
We're not trying to dig into the weeds. Obviously, with the new rule, there can be more questions than answers, but understanding the scope and understanding where the concerns are helps us have better dialogue with FRA during this period prior to implementation. I just want to call out a couple things. We can't solve the world's problems on how we're going to manage contractors and mentoring and how we're going to classify different pieces of equipment if we're signal. But I do want to call out some of the record keeping pieces, since Railtasker is a lot of your guys' sources for record keeping. Just a couple things to highlight. Railtasker, without any purchase, like the certification qualification module, is going to be able to handle these. As administrators, you'll be able to build your certifications directly in, although our support's always going to be there to help. We're going to be adding some features. We're currently onboarding a class 1 in the module and the class 2 railroad. And so, we've got the team currently focused on enhancements for that module as it stands. We will be adding, when I look at this, the electronic certificates, the Railtasker app is going to have electronic certification cards right in the app. And that will be, by the end of this year for sure, maybe likely sooner, late fall is my hope. But if you put it in writing, I'm going to put it in writing for the end of the year. And so we're going to have that. So you guys won't have to print cards. You'll have the electronic version. It will work offline. And some of the folks using Railtasker intend to do that for their conductors and engineers as well. That's probably a whole nother story outside of the webinar. And that there's a class 1 already doing that. There's precedent for that. You won't have to worry about that process. Maintaining the list, certainly Railtasker is going to do that for you. Maintaining the list of each person. When we think about contractors, let's just say worst case scenario, you're going to end up on the hook for managing your contractors' record keeping requirements, whether they're outsourced dispatchers or outsourced signal folks. I've been thinking about this. We have really a lot of enhancements in the works for the certification module. As you guys have seen, a lot of you coming down on the operations testing, right? We've been, in the last 9 months, made a lot of changes to that, and we still have some releases finalizing that project. We will be adding different permissioning because of onboarding. We do have a handful of class 1s or 3 class 1s using Railtasker, but we are onboarding one into this specific module. with the additional permissioning, it would be reasonable for us to come up with some workflows for your contractors to manage that into your Railtasker site. And so if this looks like something you guys are going to be forced to do, we're going to look at how we can make that as easy as possible for you within Railtasker. So it could just, we are keeping an eye on it, and I think we have things in the works as it stands without me changing our dev schedule to already address all of those concerns. And those might be things, maybe I'm one step ahead of your thinking, because if when I was in your chair as responsible for compliance, record keeping would be the last thing I'd be thinking of. It'd be the first thing I'd be like, how am I gonna roll out the new program and designate folks and so forth. But we'll continue to do webinars on those details. I just want you to know that we're definitely staying very engaged with this. We have a class 1 that's going to be using Railtasker not only for qualifications, but the intent is for dispatchers. I think you can look forward to some of those enhancements. The other thing I want to talk about is in the revocation processes that we talked about for both of the requirements, and I'm maybe just going past it. But yeah,
it's a slide or two after that.
Yeah, here we go. Certainly the in writing piece, but we will have sort of a revocation. There already is a way of managing it in Railtasker, but we're going to be updating that to better track reasons and things like that. And then there'll be an audit trail. All of those things the team has already scoped out and we're in the works. Definitely see a lot of enhancements coming down. Fingers crossed and the final rules delayed. Those enhancements will be there for your conductors and engineers and for your qualifications under 243 or CDLs or however you're using Railtasker. But I just want to say that certainly you don't have to worry about that piece. That's what I worry about to make sure that you're set up, and we'll do further deep dives on how that works and get into the weeds if needed. There is talk, and it's not fully decided yet, right? If there will be litigation on the final rule, whether it be the signal side or dispatching in the industry, that completely out of the realm of possibility, although I feel like as time progresses more and more, maybe that's seeming more unlikely. Certainly a lot of you are short line members because I recognize a lot of your names on that, and certainly I'm confident that the SLRA will be working on templates, being part of the safety and training committee. I know that they have every intention of providing templates like they do for all the new regulations, and I'll be assisting on that as much as I can too, as I have in the past template. I think we'll continue, like I said, our intention with this first webinar is making sure you guys have a high view of the summary, the scope, maybe where the concerns are, gathering some questions, which we have, and then making sure you guys know, because a lot of the questions we did have was specific, what will I need to do with Railtasker? So wanted to cover the big picture stuff. Keep an eye out. We'll continue to do a deeper dive as we get more information. And for those of you at RIMSI next week in Kentucky, first of all, say hi to me, but second of all, there's some breakouts on these topics as well. So we'll continue to get more information and then share it with you accordingly. That said, I'm seeing maybe some side questions, but no questions for the larger group. Paul, anything you want to add before we close out the webinar today?
No, like you said, once the compliance guide comes out, I'm sure there'll be, like with the 243, there'll be questions and answers in there as well. So we'll see that soon. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in there that we can get into eventually if we need to.
Yeah, we'll do the deeper dive, I think, I'd love to do that with FRA and ask them. They're maybe not ready for some hard questions yet anyways, so they're probably figuring out some of the details. But when I'll say not yet, because I'm sure FRA will join us. When we do that webinar for FRA, oftentimes I'll reach out to you all. For those of you who are on this webinar, I likely would just check in and see if you have questions. Rob and others at the FRA really do prefer to have that list of questions ahead of time. Not that they won't answer impromptu questions, but we'll prep for that. So we'll keep you all posted. Be safe, and thank you again for joining us. Thanks, Paul.
Yep, thanks, Katie.